Hello. Hi, guys. I don't know how many you know me, but I'm Ashish. I'm one of the organizers of Canada Meetup. So we are basically in 3 countries, in Singapore, Australia, as well as Canada. So this is also a live Zoom session, which takes some problem while setting it up. So even if you are not able to reach to this office at one point of time, you can still join the meetup on Zoom. So I think we have 2 main sessions today. One is panel discussion with RBC employees or RBC executive. So we're gonna soon introduce to them, and then we have a presentation from the Cystic team. Curtis is here, sitting in behind. So yeah, you wanna continue? So so we leave it.
Okay, guys. So the first topic today is panel discussions, and where we can talk about the cloud governance and risk. Okay, it's working. So I'm just waiting for one of our panelists to come, and then we can start. One of the panelists already here. Curtis, are you okay? You can start the topic 2, and then you can come to the topic 1. Is that okay? Yeah, because we're just waiting for the other panelists to come, so you can do that. Is it okay?
We'll just have to connect to the.
Oh, okay, okay. So we can't start with the other panelists. You can use the podium.
Yeah.
Just gonna connect with the real paper customer. Talk amongst each other. What Zoom sessions you guys have? Oh. Yeah.
Oh, you got it? Yeah, I think. Can you guys hear me? Oh, okay. Great. Hello, everyone.
Warm welcome to all of you to the Toronto Kubernetes user group meetup. I'm from CSPM, and my name is Durgesh Shukla. I work as a product marketer with CSPM on the go-to-market side, and I have with me one of my sales engineers, Curtis Collicutt. He's my colleague and a good friend. And today we are going to talk about governance. But in detail, we are going to dive into CSPM and KSPM aspects, and also lightly cover some of the other cloud governance related issues that we often see when we talk to our clients, when we talk to the prospects that we want to engage with, and also with some of our tech alliance partners and cloud partners, right? So here's a brief snapshot of the agenda. I'm going to talk about CSPM, and for everyone, I'm going to define the Gartner definition of CNAPP, which is a cloud native application protection platform. And then we will take a deep dive into posture, CSPM, and KSPM. And then I'll hand it over to Curtis. He's going to talk in detail about other governance factors, right? He's going to show us a few example workflows, and there will be also a couple of demos at the end of this talk. So let me talk a little bit about CSPM. So I want to understand how many here are from a security background. Can you just quickly raise your hand? Okay, so we have a couple of them. How many here are from like a cloud background, like you work with cloud tech or you deploy? Oh, so majority are from cloud. Okay, welcome. So so those who are from like security and cloud, they all have used something called as Wireshark, which is like a network capture tool, right? And the founder of Wireshark, Loris, is actually our founder and our CTO. He also started another open source project called Falco, and then CSPM has donated Falco to the CNCF Foundation, and it is about expected to graduate sometime this year or the coming years, right? Falco today has 65 million downloads. It's a tool for, which is considered to be like a camera, like a DVD recorder for your cloud setup, right? And CSPM Secure and CSPM Monitor are our commercial products. CSPM Secure focuses on security and compliance, and CSPM Monitor is about monitoring and performance, right? We have more than 700 commercial customers today with CSPM, right? And we work with all the clouds. We are truly multi-cloud. So AWS, Google Cloud, Microsoft, IBM Cloud, we work with all of them, right? And according to Gartner, we have been rated as one of the leaders in the CNAPP category, right, for cloud security. So that is a brief introduction about CSPM. So now I'm going to talk about cloud, right? So what are the things that we have to worry about when it comes to cloud? So we worry about things like containers, hosts, identities, your IaaS setups. And nowadays, more and more, we are looking at things like SaaS applications that are so very necessary for our day-to-day functioning, right? And to add on the top, we are worried about vulnerabilities, misconfigurations, permission issues, right? We also have to worry and monitor your workload activity, your identity activity, right? So what user is up to what action? Is that something that we need to map on a daily basis? And in general, your cloud activity, like what are your audit logs telling you, right? So these are the couple of things that we need to worry about. And most vendors will collect all of these together and show you on a unified platform, right? But what CSPM does is CSPM goes one step further. Actually, we go a couple of steps further. So we have a secret sauce called Runtime Insights. So we actually monitor your second by second happening of your infrastructure. So we have agents and we have probes that sit inside your infrastructure, your workloads, such as your Kubernetes clusters and your containers. And we monitor what goes on in there. And we have the open source Falco engine. So it is a rule engine based on which we can fire rules, we can trigger rules that can detect any malicious activity that goes on inside your system, right? And to layer it all up, we do like multi-domain correlation with the findings that we have across your vulnerabilities or your misconfigurations and map it with different aspects of your infrastructure, right? So we use something like a cloud attack graph as well, but we go much further with what we do with such tools, right? So we believe that, we shield right, which is, when it comes to detection and response, we help you with that, but we also harden and prevent. So we also shift left. And that is what today's topic is majorly going to be about. How do we help you harden and prevent? So let's dive in. So we talk about CNAP powered by Runtime Insights, and we want to consolidate cloud security for you. So let me take a step back and try and explain what are runtime insights. So typically teams will struggle with overloads of alerts, and these alerts come from various security tools, and all of them might be about vulnerabilities, permissions, or drifts. So there are typical days when you see like thousands and thousands of vulnerabilities in your system. So what happens is, because of this overload, your focus is taken away. You end up spending more time fixing issues, right? But Runtime Insight helps you to kind of focus on things that are in use. So it helps you focus on packages that are in use. So you only focus on few packages that have vulnerabilities. And similarly with permissions and threats, your focus is kind of narrowed down so that you can spend more time on the issues that truly matter, right? So that is kind of like the secret sauce of SysDig and our philosophy, and what we apply everywhere that we try to put cloud security around, right? So this is an example of the Runtime Insights feature that we have a in-use risk exposure filter. So let's say you have 1,000 vulnerabilities, but then you put an in-use package filter, you will only focus on 50 of them. So that kind of reduces the number of vulnerabilities that you have to focus on. Similarly, for configurations, you will only focus on the cloud configurations that are being used in your production systems and not worry about the rest of the misconfigurations. And similar mindset can be applied to any permission settings or your network connections, right? So here are the 4 different areas where we provide solutions. So for example, with posture management, we help you detect drift in your compliance and posture within seconds, right? When it comes to vulnerability management, because we have Runtime Insights, we can basically reduce your vulnerability noise by up to 95%, right? When it comes to cloud entitlements and permissions management, we can remove 90% of permissions that will never be used. And then finally, with detection and response, we can cut down your detection time to close to 2 seconds when it comes to Kubernetes and cloud native constructs. And we recently have also launched an agentless approach. So we have a hybrid approach of both agent and agentless towards cloud security. Now let's dive deep into cloud governance. And there are like 4 broad pillars of cloud governance. But the one that I am going to focus on is security, posture, and incidents management. And then Curtis is going to kind of walk through the rest of them. So let's talk about security posture. Security posture is basically an objective measure of your readiness. How difficult can you make it for the attackers to get into your environment, right? Do you have the right defenses in the place, right? And it basically needs you to assess actively and also manage your day-to-day security posture, right? That's what security posture can be thought about from a 10,000 feet view, right? But with cloud, it complicates your posture management. So there is like a shared responsibility model within cloud. So your cloud service provider might be AWS or Azure. It owns the security of your infrastructure, but above the infrastructure layer, you have to take care of the security of your workloads and the services and the data that you run on top of these clouds, right? The second thing is, with cloud, you have a loss of visibility and control, because the tools that worked all these years, they don't have the necessary visibility into your new cloud environment. So you have a loss of visibility and control. And then the third piece is ephemerality. So a container lifespan is about 5 minutes, give or take. And so it is very ephemeral. So you need tools which can keep a track of everything that went on within the container to do any kind of security or audit activity. And the final thing is change and churn. So the cloud infrastructure constantly keeps changing, right? So that introduces new headaches for the posture management people, right? For governance folks, right? So what are the 4 brief steps that we can classify for CSPM and KSPM? What is like the philosophy there? So first thing is you need to set the goals. The second thing, aligned to the goals, you need to map your controls. Third thing, you need to monitor how well you are doing and measure how well you are doing with regards to these controls. And then with regards to cloud, you need to constantly keep a watch for any cloud issues. And for Kubernetes, you need to keep a watch out for Kubernetes issues and constantly remediate them, right? That's like the new mantra now. You have to do continuous posture, right? So that is the philosophy. And let's talk about the measuring sticks a little bit. So of course, your own organization standards and policies come into a picture, and they play a big part in deciding how strict your posture is going to be. But there are also other compliance standards such as PCI DSS and NIST and SOC 2 that can be followed, depending on the industry that you belong to. But there are also best practices and benchmarks like CIS benchmarks, Kubernetes or Linux or Docker benchmarks, which can help in improving your posture and act as good measuring sticks. So any typical tool that you will use for cloud security posture management will give you a report card of how well you are doing with regards to these benchmarks. And also let's understand what do these controls check, right? So when it comes to cloud, they are checking configurations. What are the services that are being deployed? Are they correctly configured or not? When it comes to host configuration, such as your EC2 instances, are they having unnecessary unwanted access, right? Are you using any SEL, Linux, or AppArmor kind of security controls, which are more rigid kind of instances of infrastructure, right? On the Kubernetes side, you want to talk about and keep a tab on roles, cluster roles, bindings, but also your workloads and the service accounts which actually run these workloads, right? So these are the things that different controls will check for you within a tool like Sysdig. And what are the common issues that you will see, right? Like MFA being disabled is a common practice that we do as developers while we are creating code or debugging code, right? But typically we should not allow it to pass on to production, but this happens many times. And then there are so many stories where S3 buckets are left public, and then there are data breaches happening because these S3 buckets are public, right? And generally also when we are developing or debugging, we also disable the logging, and that also causes issues. So those are the issues that we commonly encounter on the cloud posture side. And on the Kubernetes side, we have misconfigured master or service workers, or just kubelets being too permissive, right? Those are the issues. And misconfigured etcd files and unencrypted key files are also very common, right? So to deal with this, we have a simple checklist that we have created with Sysdig. But to summarize that checklist, and you can get a link for that checklist from our deck. But to summarize it, we need to keep a live inventory database. We need to secure the IAC, so we need to secure the infrastructure as code. We need to provide instant compliance feedback. So we need to tell the developers or the people who are in charge of the code that what is the compliance feedback, but we need to do it in real time, right? And once these standards have been set, we also need to keep a tab on how much infrastructure drift is happening, right? So what is the posture drift in real time? We need a way to measure that. And the final thing is like just common sense, which is enforcing least privilege access, right? So how many people actually have access to your systems, and what is the level of access that each person has, right? That's something that you need to monitor, right? So these are some of the best practices that you have to keep in mind as you roll out the programs for your governance and posture. And now I want to talk about posture and threat detection, but I want to invite my good friend, Curtis, to take over, because he's going to dive much deeper. And in Sysdig, we have a mantra that, we always dig deeper, right? So Curtis, take it away, man.
Yeah, so I think one of the interesting things about posture management and threat detection is sometimes we get kind of stuck. And like a lot of times I talk to customers and we get stuck in the what's the difference between posture management and threat detection, right? Because this is all really part of cloud governance. So the way that I think of posture management is it's what should happen, right? And I don't think some of you might not be able to see this because the screen's pretty small and maybe the colors aren't the best to be able to see it, but what should happen is, for example, in Kubernetes, there should be no root containers running, right? Like that's what should happen. And so what posture management will do is it'll go and look at your Kubernetes clusters and say, okay, you have some containers that are running as root, like that. So it's telling you, or if you don't, then it's saying you're passing your posture management, right? It's like, are you passing? Are you failing? What's going on? But threat detection is when it's not telling you that you have a root container. It's telling you that like somebody's doing crypto mining, right? Somebody has popped one of your containers and has downloaded a crypto miner, is running a crypto miner, right? Downloaded a malicious binary, is running a crypto miner. So that's what is happening, right? So there's what should be happening, and then there's what is happening, right? So when it comes to cloud governance, and I think there's lots of different definitions of what cloud governance is, but the one that we're kind of working off of today for this presentation is like financial management, right? And I don't know if anybody remembers like back when cloud was created, right? Like there was a time when there was no public cloud, but the idea was that it was supposed to be allow economic decisions, right? Like that was one of the big benefits, right? Is like, because, like obviously I have a gray beard and I'm getting a little bit older now, longer in the tooth. But back in the day, we'd have data centers and you go, well, how much power is our data center using? And nobody would know, right? They wouldn't actually be able to tell you how much it costs. But part of the point of the cloud was to be able to say, this is exactly how much money this costs, right? It's supposed to be economic. I don't know if we've really kept that going, but that was part of the idea. And a good example of this, and just let me get to the right, let me see, where are we here? So I'll try to show you some things. So, and again, you might not be able to see everything, but so we are talking about SysTig today. SysTig is a SaaS product, and there's two pieces to it, and one is monitoring. And one of the interesting things that you can do with the monitoring piece is we can actually go into Kubernetes. We have something called Cost Advisor, and we can say, what are people actually spending in their Kubernetes clusters? And we can actually dive into and see and so this one, actually, if I go up to the entire infrastructure here, we can get an idea of how much we're spending. And so in this case, we're not actually spending that much. Probably there's people in the room here spending a lot more. But this is we're spending about $1,000 a month. And what we're doing is we're telling you that you can save about $650 of that $1,000, right? And the reason that this is kind of valuable and the reason that this works is because when you deploy an application, are there developers in the room? Who's writing code, right? Like, yeah, oh, there's a lot of developers. Okay, that's great. But it's really hard to tell how much resources your application needs, right? Like, and you might not admit it, but when the operators come and say, okay, well, what kind of resources should we give you? How much memory does your application need? How much CPU does your application need? You might give them a number, but you don't really know, right? Like you're never really sure until you put that application into production, right? And so I think that's one of the values of starting to look at the economic costs of what's actually running in your Kubernetes clusters, right? So with the Cost Advisor piece, we can go in, we can say, because again, the economics of the cloud, we know how much like GKE costs, we know how much EKS costs, right? And we can start to apply those costs on like a per namespace basis. We can say, okay, like here's our example is called money sync, right? So we've got the ability to go into this namespace and say, this is how much memory it's asked for, right? This is how much memory it's actually using. And then we can tell you what you could save, and we can give you information about how you could change that deployment in Kubernetes to like match up with the costs, right? And so in some respects, a lot of what we're talking about today is we're talking about one side, we're talking about cloud, but SysTig also is very interested in Kubernetes. Kubernetes is a little different because in Kubernetes, you can say, when you deploy an application, you can say, I would like this much memory, this much CPU, but also limit me in terms of how much I'm going to take, right? So there's it's a little bit different model than cloud, right? Because you usually don't deploy something with Terraform and say, okay, limit how much memory it's going to have. But with Kubernetes, you can do that. And so that's why the cost allocation is really interesting, because we can see what the requests are, what you're actually using, and then tell you what you can change in order to actually make this reasonable, right? Like, let me see if I can drill into this a little bit. So we'll help you to improve efficiency, and you probably can't see this, but we'll say, okay, you're requesting like half a CPU, but you're only using 0.01 of a core, right? And so there are lots of tools that do this, and Sysdig is one of them, right? But that's part of how you could like start to understand your cloud governance. How do you actually charge for your systems? And again, it's a lot of times because as developers, and I don't write code professionally, but I understand the situation, right? We don't always know what we need. As well, in Sysdig, you can also start to look at what's actually happening in your dashboards, in your application. So if I go to dashboards, workload status and performance, I can look, I'm looking at a specific app right now, and you can't really see it, but just because of the size of the screen. But we're getting all this default information, and maybe the only thing I'll mention if that's interesting about Sysdig is we've got an agent deployed. So you don't have to instrument your application. We're just pulling the information from system calls, actually. Or if you have, if you're using Prometheus and you've got like your app set up to talk to a Prometheus endpoint, we can just magically see that that endpoint's there, and we pull the information out of the system calls, right? And it's the same for a lot of other tooling, right? Like JMX and Java, that kind of stuff, right? So I'm just what I'm kind of doing is talking a little bit about how Sysdig as a platform can help you with governance, right? Like across the board. As well, what Durgesh was starting to get into was like security and incident management. That's also part of public cloud, right? Or using the cloud. Like what do you do when something actually goes wrong, right? And so what I like to talk about a lot of times is if you have an application running and something bad happens, right? Like a malicious actor, breaks into one of your containers, and it doesn't happen that often, but when it does happen, usually what happens is management comes to you, your boss or his bosses or their boss's boss, sorry. They say, well, what actually happened? Like, what's the story behind this incident? And if you don't have that information, it makes it really difficult. If you don't have any information about what happened around this event, it makes it really difficult to tell that story, right? And so I can show you a little bit about that, but maybe what I should do is talk a bit about the CSPM piece first, right? Okay, so can most people kind of see the screen? Is it okay? Yeah, okay. So part of Sysdig is the posture management. What we can do is we have all of these different frameworks, right? And so Durgesh was talking about, what were we talking about? Measurement? You were talking about, what did you call them though? I can't remember. Like measuring sticks, yeah. Measuring sticks, right? So a lot of us have some sort of measuring stick, which I would call a framework, or some people call benchmarks, right? So you've got things from CIS, and I think maybe I talked about this the last time that I was here too, but like, so who's using like NIST or CIS benchmarks in their workplace at all? A couple, right? So that's basically what CSPM is, right? So NIST and CIS, all these organizations, they produce these benchmarks. And what's a benchmark? It's a big PDF, right? Like they just give you a big PDF. Here's what we kind of expect you to do to secure your systems, whether it's Linux or Docker or Kubernetes or whatever. It's just a big document, right? So what do you do with a giant document like that? You need to take that document and in order to use like a cloud posture management, you got to turn it into code, right? And so you're probably not going to do that work. Somebody else is going to do that work, and Sysdig is the one that does that work, right? So we take all these benchmarks that maybe you can see on the screen, maybe you can't. I don't know, there's probably 50 of them here, like DISA, FedRAMP, like it just goes on and on, high trust, ISO, MITRE, right, NIST. So I guarantee that people in this room are using like some collection of those pieces, right? So what you need to do is be able to have somebody that gives you these documents in the form of code, right? And that's how you apply posture management to your cloud, to your infrastructure, to Kubernetes, to whatever. So we give you we take all those documents, we turn them into code, and we give you these policies. And then what the code actually looks like is these controls. And so I'm not sure if anybody's familiar. Has anybody heard of the Open Policy Agent? It's an open source project. There's a couple of people. Yeah, I think I might have talked about it the last time too, right? But Open Policy Agent is like a generic platform for applying controls, for doing validation, right? It can actually, most of the time it's associated with Kubernetes. You're going to usually hear OPA associated with Kubernetes, but it can actually do anything. You can, if you wanted to right now, you could go at home, look at OPA. There's a whole language called Rego, and you can start to write your own controls if you wanted to, right? And there are systems out there where you could say like apply it to Terraform or something like that, right? And so what we do is we take all those documents and then we write it, and you can't really see, but down here it says Rego, which is the OPA language, and we convert those into code, right? And then we apply that to your infrastructure, and that's what you see when we go to posture and compliance, right? And that's basically how every single CSPM system is going to work. They take the documents, turn it into some kind of code. Maybe it's OPA, maybe it's not, but they have to have a way to do the actual checks. And then what happens is we can see what the results are here. And so there's a whole bunch right here, but it's like Linux controls, Kubernetes controls. Are you passing? Are you failing? Maybe like a simpler way to look at it is I have one over here. Oops, I got logged out. I will have to log in. So if I go to posture, policies. So I have a very simple one here. I'm sorry, I just want to check the time. How much time do we have? You're okay? So this is a very simple one here, which only has like 5 checks, right? And this one's specific to Kubernetes. Like, so you might hear the term KSPM. So there's cloud security posture management, there's Kubernetes security posture management. So I've got one here that's like a very simple Kubernetes one where it says, no root, don't let the root system, file system be writable, don't let it run as root. Containers shouldn't be using the latest tag, set CPU memory and limits, right? And so we can apply that policy to our infrastructure, and then we can see what workloads we have that aren't meeting that posture, right? But then the interesting thing becomes that what you can do is you can use that policy to validate other parts of your tooling, right? And so what I've got here is, and this might be hard to see as well, but this is some Terraform. So who's using Terraform to manage their public cloud? It's like lots of people, right? So the interesting thing about Kubernetes, and I'll get into this a bit later, is that there's this concept of an emission controller that can like sit in between the API. But in the public cloud, there's nothing between you and the API. The interface between you, what you're doing, and what the cloud is doing is the Terraform code, right? So what we can do is we can use the policy that I showed you back over here, this policy, to validate your infrastructure as code, right? So what I've got here is I've got Terraform. The idea is supposed to be until this Terraform is deployed into Kubernetes. But the idea is that this initial piece of Terraform is supposed to be secure, right? It's like, so we've set up a bunch of stuff. It's not running as root. The file system is not writable. And we've got CPU limits set here, right? But then what happens if a developer comes in and they say, our app isn't running properly because we don't know what memory and resources it needs, right? And they come in and they change, or maybe it's a DevOps. We can blame DevOps too, or security, anyway. And they say, we need more resources. So I'm going to change this Terraform to remove the resource limits, right? So now it's unlimited, right? But that goes against our policy over here, right? So what we can do with Sysdig is we can actually check, sorry, let me go back to this here. We can check that code. And we can say, okay, somebody has made a change, they've made a pull request, and now a check is going to run to validate whether or not that new code is applicable to our policy, whether it meets our policy. And obviously in this case, it doesn't, right? So we've said, this workload doesn't have, this pull request does not have a CPU limit. This pull request does not have a memory limit anymore, right? Does that make sense? Yeah. And so like as developers, we know like there could be many, many checks in that pull request, and one of them can be like a security request, right? Let's see, what else? Any questions so far? I don't want to take up too much time here, but I think maybe the one last thing that I want to talk about is Kubernetes. And so in Kubernetes, and this is what I was kind of getting to with the public cloud APIs, right? In Kubernetes, you can actually stick another piece of code in between the API request and when it actually runs, right? Like, so a user makes an API request, before it actually gets created in Kubernetes, there's a couple spots where you can actually alter or reject that request, right? So it's like the user makes a request, it goes to the API sends it to another system to validate it, right? Like you can't do that in the public cloud because that's kind of crazy. But you can do it in Kubernetes. And so Sysdig also has an admission controller where we can go, okay, you're trying to deploy a workload into Kubernetes. It's going to have a validating admission controller that we supply you. And that admission controller is going to go and look at this KSPM policy that I showed you over here. Wherever that went. Oh, I lost it. But, or no, it's over here. Yeah. It's going to look at this policy and say, does this workload meet this policy? And then it can actually accept or reject it based on whether or not it accepts that policy, right? So maybe I'll stop there because that was quite a bit. But I think this is really interesting. This is one of the big benefits, I think, of Kubernetes, is that you can actually stick something in between the API and what actually gets created, which is kind of crazy and amazing. But you can do it, right? And that's like a big value of Kubernetes. You can write, and with Sysdig, you could write any policy that you wanted that made sense, and then enforce that in your cloud security, right? So yeah, maybe I'll stop there. But if you have any questions, let me know. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Imagine that Sysdig has two lines of that. There's one with one without or one with agent, one without agent. So what about agents? That is eBPF to step on.
Yeah, so we do, so like there's agentless and there's agent models, right? And there's actually stuff in between, like where do you want the agent to run? Do you want it to run in our infrastructure? Do you want it to run in your infrastructure? There's kind of a spectrum. But eBPF is still an agent model. eBPF still goes into the kernel, right? So there's, Sysdig does two things in terms of an agent. It can either just be a plain old kernel module, which has been around for, since Linux was invented, or eBPF, which is another model of getting something into the kernel, but it's only been around for like 5 or 6 years and only works in modern kernels. But we do agentless. We can specify where the agent runs, or we can also have an agent. And that's where Durgesh was talking about runtime insights. We get lots of information from that agent.
Agent is not using Kubernetes API at the lower level.
Technically, yeah. So it's sitting in the kernel. It's seeing every system call, which is like allotted valuable information. And so we get all, like when Durgesh was talking about in use, like for example, I'm not trying not to pick on developers, but like say you're a new developer to a Java project, you're not going to go into the dependencies and start messing around, probably, right? Like you're not going to like delete dependencies that you don't think are needed. You're just not going to do that. So a lot of times you don't know what the dependencies are in your application. You don't know, right? So you might have a Docker container image that has 1,000 dependencies in it, but only a few of them are actually used at runtime when the app is loaded. So with that agent in the kernel, we can tell you what dependencies are loaded into memory by the application. So instead of looking at like 1,000 dependencies that are in the Docker file, you might only need 10 or 20 that are loaded into memory, right? And so, yeah, I mean, maybe that was a long-winded answer to your question, but we're sitting in the kernel. We see every system call. It is in each Kubernetes. If we're talking about Kubernetes, for example, the agent is in each node in that node's kernel. Yeah, either as kernel module or eBPF. It doesn't. You don't have to do that, but that's normally how people use Sysdig. Yeah. So yeah, sorry. Thank you very much. Hopefully that wasn't too long. But if you have any other questions,
there's no possible. I have a question. Nice to meet you, sir. So, a question is on enterprise architecture. So, say well, a large firm, a dinosaur company that may run Prisma Cloud, may run Dynatrace, right? No matter what, it doesn't matter. Say a large bank that acquires a smaller firm with woozy policies, right? Then the question comes, well, what do we do about those policies? What do we do about those products? Do we decommission? Do we merge? How do we modify them? So from the standpoint of enterprise architecture, what are the tools, practices, and techniques would you recommend to someone who is facing that situation Do you have any experience in that kind of merger and consolidation process?
Yeah, and then
Thank
what
you.
to do about their infrastructure basically and their application.
Specific about policies and how they apply to say in terms of protection of web application firewall and the web properties servers, for example, web application.
Yeah, I mean, I think to
Thank
me,
you.
like the easy answer is to start understanding what their policies are and what frameworks they're using, right? So are they using specific pieces of NIST or CIS and those kind of things? That's probably the only example I can give you. Like I think last time, I think at the Terraform meetup, actually, we talked about web application firewalls. Sysdig isn't a web application firewall at all. But yeah, from like a policy perspective, it's just like people really like, actually the interesting thing is that when you look at all of these different controls in Sysdig, so if we pick one of these controls, it's actually, maybe you can't see it, but it's part of a whole bunch of, like, most of these different frameworks have the same kind of concept of control, like they share controls, right? So this one control, talking about a certain file, is actually part of like 20 different controls. So I don't know, like I don't have a ton of experience, to be honest, with what you're asking, but that would be where, from a CSPM perspective, that's where I would start, is like, what are your policies? What controls do you have? Are you using specific frameworks? And how can we bring those over into, for example, if you're using Sysdig, right? I mean, every CSPM uses these same documents, like the CIS Docker, the CIS Kubernetes, they all use the same to build their controls, right? So it would actually be relatively straightforward to bring like another CSPM system over to a new CSPM, because we're all using the same controls. Like what happens after that is the interesting part, right? Like, can we do things like check your IFC code or have an admission controller and that kind of stuff? Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Hopefully that was helpful. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. So next we have we just swapped actually the topic one, now it's become that topic one. The topic two is the panel discussions, and this is very interesting topic. It's about the cloud governance and risk. And we have very special guest and panelist, Dele Saliu, Senior Director, Cloud Governance, RBC, and Kunle Olusania, Director, TI Risk, RBC. We'll have a kind of quick chat discussion about the cloud governance and risk postures, not only about the RBCs, about the industry standards, how it works. If I talk to my my closest friend or back in India, like my mom or sister, they say, okay, I understand the cloud, or what is cloud governance. So because the governance is meant to be doing by the CSP, so what you guys are doing it in bank. So there are a few very interesting topics actually we can cover it through this panel discussion. So I would like to actually invite Kule and Dele to come, and then we can start that. And it's great to have you here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Audible? Okay. Yeah, fine. So cloud is an actually amazing topic. Like I'm sure, like including myself, that people are dying to understand, like, oh, what is the cloud? How does it work? And because there is a very low visibility when it comes to private cloud or public cloud. So I feel like these sessions will be very great sessions, because we can learn a lot of things from both of you. You both are coming from a different background. I know, Dele, you're coming from the red bank, and now it's the blue bank, and Kule, you have been there in the risk for a longer period of time. I would like to start with the quick introductions, Dele and Kule, if you can just give a little bit of your background.
Absolutely. Is this working? Okay. I hope you can all hear me. Dele Saliu, Senior Director, Cloud Governance over at RBC. 20 plus years of experience in IT. I enjoy what I do, basically, and cloud, to come down to the topic in the last 7 years, I would say, really got involved within security for cloud, and then obviously now in cloud governance. So a lot of my experience is, my background comes within operations as well. That's where I started, basically securing the bank. Now, I also worked for, he mentioned, Deb mentioned Red Bank, CIBC, for 16 years before coming over to RBC. My role at RBC started about 8 months ago. So I'm kind of new in the role, but in terms of the experience that I bring to it, really enjoyable in terms of what I do. But yeah, that's me in a nutshell. I'm glad to share my LinkedIn profile for anyone that wants to connect and talk more about career advice. But I look forward to maybe talking about that. I have mentors of my own, and I'd like to maybe share some insights as well. Thank you. Can you hear me? Yes, so my name is Kunle Olusanya. I actually have been with RBC for about 12 years, been with this bank for about 12 years. I started out in RBC in the internal audit division, looking at cybersecurity and infrastructure platform type audits. About 4 years ago, I moved over to the technology platform. So my current role now is more of supporting the global technology teams on risk, operational risk, cloud being one of them. Cloud actually was moved over to our group, the global technology team, about 2 or 3 years ago. And one of the asks for us then was, can you guys help us develop a cloud governance framework? So we started that out. And the reason for that was regulatory requirements. So I've been with RBC for 12 years. I enjoy what I do. It's great, dealing with different teams, not just cloud. I also deal with regulators a lot. Most of the regulatory requests that comes to the global technology teams will come through me. We help to manage that. But we have all host of other items that we work with the technology teams on. Before this job, before RBC, I was with Bank of Montreal. I was there for 5 years, internal audit. Before then, I was a software developer. So it was just a career switch from, software development to
It's a roller coaster ride, like you're just changing and
So that's me in a nutshell.
Okay. Thank you for your introductions. So I have some set of questions. I'm taking kind of priorities from you guys, because I'll ask some few questions and then I'll give you options to you ask your questions. And I'll not go very hard questions, Delay, because he's my boss, and it's a wrong time, because I wanted to bring them in before that, but it couldn't work. But now it's October and kind of appraisal time. I cannot ask you some tough questions. I have to be just a joke apart. So Delay, I know that you've been in governance, cloud, like I know that you both, like you did CSSP, you've been in information security for a longer period of time. What does cloud governance mean? And what are the key features that actually bring you to work on?
Yeah, so governance is already a big word. When you add cloud to it, guess what? It gets even bigger. It gets in terms of scope. When I think of cloud governance, I think it really depends on the person that's answering the question. So the context in which they're answering the question, the type of governance that they do in cloud. It could be security related. It could be more third-party risk. It could be, you could go on and on. But the simple way that I like to answer that question is, think about cloud governance as the way that you can enable your business. Like every organization has a business objective, or well, in terms of the banks, I won't tell you what that objective is, but I think you guys know. Yeah, you want to enable the business to adopt cloud while protecting your organizational assets. That's really the simplest, not simple, there's more to it, but in terms of a general way to determine or define cloud governance, that's sort of where what I would say simply it means, really, because you could really get down into it because there's so many facets of cloud. I promise not to go on and on about cloud governance in terms of the definition, but think about it, like it really depends on the deployment model. It really depends on the service model. Deployment model in terms of whether you're talking about public cloud, whether you're talking about private cloud, whether you're talking about hybrid, or there's even community cloud, right? So it really depends on how you apply cloud. And secondly, are you talking about infrastructure as a service? Are you talking about platform as a service or software as a service, right? So I could go on and on, but I'll I guess defer to the maybe not to depth, but the audience for any questions you may have in that regard in terms of definition. Thanks, Deb.
Thanks, Rele. That makes sense actually, how the governance starts, and then any companies, like when they start with any traditional GRC or the cloud GRC, the governance comes first, and then risk. And maybe my second question is to Kunle, like when the governance setup done for the cloud or traditional on-prem or private public, what are the biggest risk in cloud, and how you deal with those currently? Like if it is those kind of risk.
So if you ask me this question about 5 years ago, I will answer differently, and I will say it somewhat. Maybe I didn't tell you. If you ask me this question 5 years ago, I will answer differently, and I will tell you that shadow IT will be the biggest cloud risk that organizations have, and the reason is at the time, 5-6 years ago, most organizations just just trying to jump on the cloud bandwagon. Each groups will go out and procure cloud services with their credit card, on the name of the company. So that became a very big risk. And part of what the regulator started to push, and part of what the cloud governance is helping to do now is to alleviate that. Meaning, you cannot go outside of the central coordinating team, the central cloud team, to procure cloud services. So that's been. So if you ask me today, what's my biggest, what would be my biggest concern as the organization now starts to deploy more applications into the cloud? I would say it's the concern around how do we effectively protect our data. Data is out there, even though for these organizations is not. They're very cautious about what we put out there. There's some workloads being run on the cloud, but certain level of data, such as AI, is not going to the cloud as of yet. So there is a caution on that, but it's still a risk that you're still processing something out there. And how are we dealing with that? So as part of the risk team, and feeding from the governance framework that we have is to make sure that applications are properly assessed before they put them in either public cloud or private cloud. Private cloud less so for risk, but both of them they're put through the same level of scrutiny. We put them through that. We perform what we call some form of risk assessment. I shouldn't say the name, but we perform some level of risk assessment that would look at artifacts of those applications that is trying to run workload in the cloud. Make sure that those artifacts meet enterprise requirements, security requirements. So once that's done, the artifacts also include things source code scanning, DAT, SAS, and one of the things we want to make sure is as these applications that I want to deploy in the cloud are coming up, we want to make sure that they don't have any high or medium risk vulnerabilities. If they do, they will be assessed and assessed. So when we do the risk assessment, we present them to a board. So we have a board that look at these, applications, and with the aggregated risk result that we've done, that gets presented. This application is scoring maybe a medium risk or high risk, but they still want to come and talk to the council members. A decision is made because of that. Oftentimes, the council members are going to disagree that this is not ready to go forward. So that's how we deal with, my concern about, how do we protect data is, very proactively make sure that we check all the boxes, and we make sure that they go through a council. So that's on the governance side. But we also have, as those applications are going forward, we also have some kind of preventive controls that will be part of what's being implemented. We have detective controls as well. At the same time, we also have key risk indicators that we would look at time to time, making sure that they are not breaching the key indicators that we have set. So those are the kind of things that we do, when applications are, going forward, and that allays some of our concerns that, these applications going to the cloud may present or expose the organization to certain risk.
So, Dele, I'll just link to that answer that Kulne is saying. The risk has actually changing, that we're doing the SaaS, DAST, pen testing, and other kind of measurement. Now, any big bank or any other organizations, they are start with a single cloud service provider. Then slowly they go with the 2 cloud service providers. Then now it's a hybrid and multi-cloud. And plus they have their own legacy systems and on-prem. How is cloud governance is actually evolving, and what's the next step? Like now generative AI is coming, and the chatbot and so many things, machine learning, those are coming. So how you think that the cloud governance is evolving?
So in terms of how I think cloud governance is evolving, for me, well, there's the dream world and there's the ideal real world, right? In the dream world, you should be able to have your cloud governance be self-serviced within your organization, using tools, using people, using technology, right? One example, you mentioned the magic word, I guess since December of 22, is it that Chat GPT got into, so everybody's talking about generative AI and how it can help them. Why don't we talk about how it can help cloud governance, right? For me, fundamentally, can it help? Absolutely, right? Your business should be able to actually, and the developers are going to kill me for this, self-service, like as in, if you want to develop something, you go in, you key in your parameters, your developers work on it, you get your cloud built for you, like pretty much on demand, right? So for me, that's the dream world. But we live in the real world, right? We can talk more and more about how technology aids cloud governance and other parts of IT. But for me, living in the real world, you need to be able to set up, at least at the very minimum, guardrails for how cloud is done in your organization, which comes with the cloud strategy. You have to have a cloud strategy. That cloud strategy goes up to your IT strategy. You mentioned on-prem versus cloud. How does the organization determine if you're going to be on-prem for a particular application or you're going to go to cloud for it? So you need those things in place in order to have a functioning cloud governance program.
Yeah, both are like great inputs, like those very important nowadays, like how the evolving. So when it comes to generative AI, chat GPT and cloud governance and GRCs, every angles when you're looking into it, and mainly for the risk professionals, I actually watching Google Next. They were talking about one a hybrid cloud, and there is a one portions the guy, the CTO, he was talking about there are three kind of companies actually evolved. One company they never actually planned to come to the cloud, and they somehow they vanished, and within 4 or 5 years. Other one, which is the mid range, they actually just adopted, they're surviving, and the one who born during the cloud era, and they are doing good. So for any startup companies, so we have seen there some are aggressive and some are playing kind of a calculative risk to come to the cloud and play and get more benefit of it. What are the key measures actually they should take, like startup companies, from your point of view, Kunle, the risk professional side?
Well, I've not run a startup before, but whether it's a startup or any other company, I think the most important part is to assess the lay of the land. You need to understand the terrain that you are operating in, what kind of business you're involved in, what kind of regulatory environment are you going to be working on, because that drives the kind of services, the service provider that you're able to obtain. So I would say, understanding of the regulatory requirements, which might drive your where you deploy things, is a key factor. And once you've decided to do that, cost is another factor as well for a startup. Which cloud service provider will give you the best service for your money. That's a factor. But once you now made a decision to go in, the next thing is to similar to what I said earlier, is how do you now first of all, you need to understand, when you deal with the cloud service provider, whether it's SaaS, PaaS or IaaS, service model, you need to understand the responsibility model, which one belongs to you, which one belongs to the cloud service provider. But once you've crossed that line, your next thing is how do you start to securely use the platform? How do you make sure that, like I said earlier, how do you make sure that you are able to assess whatever you're putting in the cloud, put a security hat on, assess it, and make sure that it's not putting you at risk. So it's similar to what I said earlier, that maybe for a startup might not have the size of RBC and have a council, but certain checkpoints has to be in place that if this is not met, I'm not going forward. Otherwise, you find yourself in trouble quickly. The other part for that is maybe less so for them, but the other part for that is what is their resiliency requirement? Are they able to just stick to one AZ and do what they need to do? Or do they need to work on multiple AZ? So those are the kind of things they need to think about very well as they try to engage cloud. But I think the most important thing for them, especially a startup, is security, which you get a lot of that going to the cloud service providers.
Absolutely, like this is very key. Who's like from the wearing the risk hat, and you need to check like all the aspects, like where you are missing or anything or not. Like the cyber attacks or anything can happen in any site. Like so, you have to be close all those. You have to be very vigilant on that.
Right.
I might ask this now different questions to both of you. Maybe are you guys from any green bank or red bank, or we have just okay. So my questions, Dele, Kunle, like how RBC actually doing when we're talking about the product and service when it comes to the cloud, from the technology platform risk management perspective, what do you think, like how RBC is doing in that case?
So for me, I think about cloud governance in terms of, I know a lot of folks, when they hear cloud governance, they want to think about, oh yeah, you're going to not enable the business to move forward, because as Kunle said earlier, to run a proper cloud governance program, you have controls in place. You have a framework that you're following. You let the business know, yeah, you cannot do this or that or that. I think the key for me and the change in mindset that I'm seeing at RBC is enablement versus control, right? There's always a balance. You want to make sure you're enabling the business within the guardrails, within the risk posture of the organization. So for me, I think the key part is that, like, you want to make sure the business is still able to run, that the cloud team is still enabled to have applications adopt cloud, right? I think the cloud journey at RBC has been, I would say, I know a little bit about it in my previous org, but at RBC, I think it's, I would be a little bit leaning more on the side of it's a bit more mature at RBC because of that, because of the enablement mindset, right? If there was one little tidbit I wanted to maybe add to what Conley had said earlier, if you maybe already consume cloud in one way or the other, if you're using Netflix or, I don't know, Amazon Prime or whatever, you're already a startup, in my opinion, because you know what? You're logging into their systems. This is a SaaS in some ways, and you're providing your data, right? So they're keeping your personal information safe. How are they doing that, right? So those organizations, how are they doing that well, right? So for me, companies like RBC, some of the other banks, green banks, red banks, whatever you call them, banks, they look to the Googles and the Amazons. Like, how do they do this well, right? So those, it's very tough. The regulatory landscape that Conley mentioned for banks, very different from a Google or a Netflix, but if you start to think outside the box, I think, and enable the business, that mindset is what is important for me.
Thanks. Kule, you want to add anything in that? Or?
Can you remind of the question again?
Yeah, so my question is like when, what do you say? Like the product and services in that RBC, like what do you think, like when it is coming for the enablement, the services we are adding into it in our, mainly in the technology platform and risk management, how RBC actually ensure that those product services are actually secured and can be used by the customers 24/7, 365 days?
Yeah, I think that the approach that the organization has taken, which is the governance framework, which did not exist 2 years ago, and how they scrutinize, is actually valuable to give assurance that any product that is deployed in the cloud is going to meet at least meet RBC's security standards and requirements. It will meet our regulatory requirements. So I think that's all I'm going to add. That it's for the fact that we have a formalized way of engaging these business partners is a good thing. And I know in the past, one of the challenges, one of the issues that we always had is the fact that they felt the application team might feel that we're not moving fast enough. Because right. For them, for the application teams, they just want to develop, jump and start running workload in the cloud. But you have a situation where you've run a pen test for an application that is going to be internet facing. There are issues, and the cloud governance or the council is saying, no, we cannot go forward. In a traditional environment, this roadblock is not there. They'll go forward regardless. But now, because of the way we perceive cloud as, the risk exposure that it gives, we will not let that happen. And I think everybody has come to that understanding, and that's helping the relationship and helping us to move this application of products faster.
My next question would be like, if anyone interested to join in cloud governance or cloud risk, that portfolio, what would be the kind of homework or kind of preparations they need to do it?
The way that I think the simple thing to say is just read about cloud. Just start. Like, I know there are a lot of developers in the crowd. I saw earlier when it was asked who's a developer. There's lots of self-service items out there to know about cloud. A lot of you guys are already probably even more well-versed than I am, and I'm in cloud governance, right? So for me, that's a good tool, like self-serve, like know as much as you can. Like I personally, you can ask ChatGPT anything. It's a generative AI. Like you can learn, you can have so much fun with it that you don't even realize you're learning, right? So that's where it starts, the enthusiasm there, the ability to just, be wanting to innovate based on learning, right? Secondly, if I get a little bit more official, of course, there's certifications out there for cloud, there's certifications for security. Look into those, right? So if you want to really get down to it, there's ISC Squared has a couple. There's one for cloud. There's one with ISACA, CSA, I think, so I could go on and on, right? So good things to start with if you want to get involved. You can always talk to me after. Thanks.
So now, because it's October, this is a cybersecurity awareness month. My question, so it's very related to a personal thing. Like a few days ago, my daughter actually, she's 8 years old, and she just came and she said, Dad, I can see your webcam is actually that is on. So can you close it? So because of the privacy, I don't know if she knows about the privacy or not, but she told me. And the night she checked that whether our door is locked or not. So, so I was thinking that when I'm in my childhood, I used to check that whether our door is locked or not, like physical security. But now the kids, they know about the logical access control and physical access control. What do you think about what do you advise to the new generations and the who are studying or freshers, like what they should actually learn about cybersecurity or cloud security if they want to come into enroll, take those roles?
Well, I don't think it's about learning those things. As Dele said, I think it's really it's about being inquisitive. I'm not about to brag, but personally, I like to just dig my finger in anything that I can learn. It surprises people when I tell them I was a developer before I was a Java developer, and I left it about 18 years ago. But lately, I just got interested in things like all these JavaScript framework like React, and I've been doing it, and it surprised. I'm sure you remember one of the tools that we it surprised people that certain things that it's not what I'm supposed to be doing, but I felt it's important I do it. So what I'm saying is, it's to kind of be inquisitive, to look at other things that you're not ordinarily, it's not in your space, but that gets you exposed to things. There is a lot of certification in cloud. There's CCAK from Cloud Security Alliance. There's CCSK, the auditing. CCAK, there's CCSK, and there's a lot of other ones that would, and most materials on those sites on CSA website are free. So, I think the exam, you get tokens to take the exam twice. So a lot of materials out there that you can get to take a step into these areas.
Thank you so much. I don't have further questions, so I can actually open this stage. Like, if anyone having any questions.
Hi. So banks are usually pretty conservative, and they're not known for, usually like banks in Canada and USA, not known for like bleeding edge technology usage and all that stuff. And they're notorious for running big old systems on mainframes somewhere in basements and stuff like that. So how does that affect you? How do you join that, like with this like super old baggage, which banks usually tend to have, with the new cloud stuff, which is relatively new in bank standards? And so how it affects you, how you join, and like, do you have big mainframes in basements?
So the mainframe is not going away. It's still there, and most of the banks, and this one, the red one, the blue one, the green one, all of them have most of their core systems on mainframe. And taking those out into saying you're sending it to cloud is not going to happen. And IBM is doing a fantastic job to kind of continue to give these organizations something that make sure that they stay on this system. So it's not going to happen soon. Maybe it happens years out. But one thing that most of these organizations are doing is, even though they have their core system, core applications, they may have components of those applications in the cloud, maybe to run analytics, maybe to run some, to do some specialized things. Your data doesn't leave the prem, but you're using the cloud. Even if your data is leaving, it's encrypted, at rest, in transit. So it's those kind of things that the banks are doing. But they are, to your point, there is a reluctance to start exposing data outside of their walls. It's happening, but data like PII data, that is always thought about very well. Even on the private cloud as well, we have private cloud which sits within the prem, within the data centers. The level of scrutiny we put on that as well is also the same, because now, because the application are in container, we want to make sure that there's no issues with one application or one vulnerability in one application or one container escaping and impacting a lot of other applications that sit in the platform. But to your point, it's still going to be years out for you to say this bank this size is running all their workload in the cloud. Mainframe is here for a long time.
Any further questions?
Hi, this question is to either of you. So you sign off on risks for many of the internal customers, we'll call them, of yours. How do you deal with anxiety with regards to your job, right? And how do you sleep well at night? Because that's a good question. I think I should be asking you.
Maybe I'll take a very stab at that. The simple answer is I sleep like a baby. Just start with that. Thanks for being concerned. But on a more serious note, when you come to the table with not a combative stance, you already have won, right? Like, you come to the table and you enable the business understand what they'll gain by putting those things in place. Think about it, like developers, we're always talking about shift left. Putting security in first, always shift left. Save yourself some headache later on. Think about that with cloud governance, right? You just got to make the case to them and sleep like a baby at night. All right, I'll let Conley.
I also sleep well. When I don't sleep, I just do other things. But I think in matter of whether things are combative or not, I think because we've set the parameters of how things will be done. We have enterprise policies, we have standards, and we also have the cloud governance framework, which guides how applications are deployed, what kind of steps, what kind of, how does it flow from dev to prod? How do we release them into production? Those exist. So if somebody wants to go over that, then it has to be somebody with authority, and it has to be. It's not my problem. But we've given all the information. We've risk assessed the situation. We've said this thing is high risk. I'm not going to lose sleep if they say, I'm willing to accept this risk. But it has to be somebody upstairs somewhere here that says, I'm okay to do that. But it's not the matter of being combative, it's a matter of communicating very well. Documenting in the framework, we have roles or responsibility, documenting those well, everybody knows what they're doing. And also when we do the risk assessment, we come up with the likelihood of risk, the particular risk materializing, the impact. Oftentimes we also put the risk score on it, so that on a scale of 0 to 10, 5 being the middle, if your risk score is going to red side, and you're telling us to move this forward, that's not something I want to do. So it's not a matter of anxiety. Things are documented and we're following it. But of course, there's going to be a situation where people kind of, want to have it their way.
We have one more question.
Hi, everyone. So my question is for startups. Do founders should consider using like Kubernetes or cloud from the beginning, or should they let their company to be a little big, or then they decide to move on?
I'll take a stab at that. I think definitely from the start helps. Like if you start up, think about it. Maybe I'll make a simple analogy. You have a virtual machine that's required by your business, right? Do you go out and buy that whole machine? That's the capital expenditure that you're talking about now, versus the cloud model, which is operational expenditure. You need a VM. You know how much you need. It's kind of like the SysDig example that was given. You want to only use what you need and you pay for that. So as a startup, that's already a win-win. So for me, definitely you start from the beginning. You start with using cloud as much as you can. Now, it may not be as practical depending on the kind of business. For the traditional banks that go back, mainframe, things like that, those are not going away. And there's regulations around those, right? So, but for a startup, absolutely, the flexibility is there. If you're running a business, for example, that caters to more customers in the summer versus the winter, guess what? Elasticity is there. You can scale up very fast in the summer versus the winter when you scale down road. So there's a lot of advantages already with a startup using cloud. If I can say that, yeah.
I mean, just one more thing I'll add is, I created the AWS free account. So as a startup, if I wanted to use some free things to get things developed, I think that's another cost saving you can find there. But I agree with Dele. I think, I would say, cloud will be your best option for a startup.
Thank you so much, Dele, Kunle, for giving this time and taking out the time and came here and give great inputs. Thank you so much for coming here. And the next is Ashish will give some giveaway, and then we have some group pictures and we have food outside. So there's the rest of the agenda. Thanks, Dele. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So basically, as a part of Meetup, we do more, we want to do more. And it's beginning here. So we have three, I'll say, Google Forms. So if you want to sponsor something, if you want to be a speaker at the Meetup, as well as if someone wants to help us arranging everything. So we have some coming Meetup. So we are planning actually 2nd November. Right now it's under plan. The next Meetup of our group right now. There are some on, basically, as I mentioned in the earlier, we have in Singapore, we have in Australia. So there are some.
Yeah, just a quick update, you can follow in LinkedIn and Meetup. So you can see the updates, upcoming events. You can register.
So we are talking to Packet, and Packet gives us 2 or 3 books every month. Thank you, Packet, for that. Again, these gonna be ebooks. Although we have a questionnaire for this, but I'm not gonna do the questionnaire because of the time. I'm just gonna scroll the people's name in Meetup, whoever joined. And you guys, whoever wins, they need to share the email. Please send it to me. My Rajesh should send me the Meetup. First goes to East. I'm sorry if I'm not pronouncing.
It's Ece. It's a Turkish name.
Okay. So which one you want? So it's sure. The other one is Trainer Jar. That's you? Okay. The other one is Amaha Alam. Is someone? Sacha Smart? So you get the somewhere 50 people. Either right now after this event, or you can LinkedIn message me. So again, thanks to the packet, and this is more like an open mic for 2 minutes. If someone is hiring someone, they can say here, they can message me or Deb. We're gonna publish it to the team and whoever wanna apply. Or if someone is looking for a job, also can reach to us, because sometimes some of the recruiters calls us and we redirect them to the people who is interested. Yeah. Yeah, that's all. Thank you, guys.
Pictures, like maybe you can sit here and just look back. That way. Yeah, see others.
No, it's in fact, right? Why not?
You can just.
Thank you, guys. There is a pizza and some drink outside.
Thank you.